My name is Shubham Chawla. I work at Something's Brewing. And today I'm here to help you understand the French press better and demystify coffee. Right. So let's begin. So the idea of the session is so that you understand the French press better. Where was I? Okay, so some of you registered for the session along with the kit, which included which included our Boudin French press and coffee, and some of you just got the pass. So I hope everybody has a French press or is aware of what a French press is. First of all, if not, we can discuss that as well. You feel free to brew alongside me, and while you're brewing, you may have some questions. So that will also obviously help you understand this a little better. French press is a very basic brewing method. It's not very complex, yet you can actually have a lot of variations in the way your coffee tastes and the way you're brewing, right? So there are lots of little things that could actually impact the flavor of your coffee. And as I'm speaking, I'm just looking for something to agitate my French press with. So I have a paddle. Okay, so to begin with, French presses, first of all, come in different sizes. So it's important for you to understand what kind of press works for you. For example, this is a single cup press that does about 300 ml. And most popular presses are, around the 600 ml range. So these two are 600 ml French presses. This is also around the same quantity, but this is the stainless steel version, a double wall stainless steel version, and this is almost a liter in quantity, right? This is again a stainless steel version. These two are double walled French presses. The unique thing about this one is that it's travel friendly. So again, French presses would you would choose your French press based on your lifestyle, right, and how many people there are. So it's a pretty basic thumb rule. I mean, I would suggest just get 600 ml version. You can do 1 cup or 2 cups with it, so it's foolproof. Ultimately, buying a French press is something we will also get into a little detail a little later. But I want to first get into the brewing aspect of it, right? So I'm just going to pick one French press. This one's something that I like using. It's got markings and it's also transparent, so you can see what's happening. So I'm going to put the others aside and we'll bring them in a little later, right? Now, French press is an immersion brewing method. An immersion brewing method basically means that your water and coffee are in contact for the whole brewing time, and the coffee is immersed in the water, right? As opposed to a drip method or an espresso method that basically is passing water through coffee, and you have a final extraction. So the fun thing about the immersion method is it's very forgiving. So you can goof up more in an immersion method and still get a decent cup of coffee, which is why we say a French press is very beginner friendly. It's also, you can brew a French press while multitasking as well because it's not a very engaging method. Okay, so the water to coffee ratio, right? So a French press would usually use a stronger recipe. So you would usually do a 1:10 to a 1:15 recipe for your coffee to water ratio. So I use a scale for accuracy. Now, if you don't have a scale, you'll need to gauge with a scooper, right? Or a tablespoon. So 1 tablespoon, if you don't have a scale, is about 7 grams of coffee, coarsely ground, 6 to 7 grams of coffee. And a scooper is slightly more. I'm using a scale right now to brew my coffee, but I'm going to show you in a scoop as well. So I have two trays of coffee here. The one on the left is slightly finer. This is more for a pour over. And the one on the right is what's going to be used for a French press, right? So it's about a medium coarse grind side. So it's coarser than a pour over, right? Maybe slightly finer than a cold brew. So I've just ground this and kept this to show you. I'm just going to use this coffee because I don't want to waste it. So the scoops are slightly larger than the tablespoons. This is about 8 grams of coffee per scoop. So just half more, right? So I have 20 grams of coffee here. Now, the idea is I prefer a 1:12 for a medium dark roast of coffee. So once you set your ratio, you're basically, and you figured your grind size out, you're going to basically start pouring your water in your coffee. So the first pour is essentially to wet the grounds. If your coffee is extremely fresh, this is one of the most crucial parts of your brewing experience because what happens here is you have your bloom, right? So if your coffee is very fresh, a lot of bubbling happens in the stage and a lot of carbon dioxide escapes from your coffee. So it's basically getting ready for an even extraction. And at this stage now, we would start putting in the rest of our water in one swift motion. So I put 60 ml of water in the first phase. and now I'm going to take it all the way up to 240, right? So we covered our ratio and we covered our grind size. Now, what is the next important thing? Something that's very important is agitation, right? You can either choose to agitate or not agitate. What agitation does, or movement of water and coffee does, it speedens up or hastens your extraction. So ultimately, you don't need to agitate, but if you want a quick mix, agitation helps. But just know that if your coffee is bitter at the end, you can reduce the amount of agitation you do, right? That's basically post brewing. My timer is on. We get into brewing time now, right? So usually a French press brews for about 4 minutes. Now, there is no hard and fast rule for this. If your coffee is finer than usual, you can brew it in 2 to 3 minutes. If your coffee is extremely coarse, right? If it's like it's barely been ground, you can go up to 8 minutes. Right? And always remember that ultimately it is a combination of ratio, grind size, brewing time. And the final parameter is obviously one of the most important parameters and something overlooked by most people as well, which is the temperature of the water. You do not want your water to be extremely hot. That is, you don't want it to be at boiling. You want it to be just off a boil at about 92 degrees Celsius. So if you don't have a temperature control kettle like we do at the Experience Center, you can just heat up water on a pan, bring it to boil, and keep it off the heat for about 30 seconds. That will essentially reduce the temperature by about 8 degrees Celsius, right? So now that we've gotten the basic parameters of brewing and we have our first cup of coffee, which is brewing in our press, we have about 2 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions about the basic parameters of brewing coffee with the French press? But obviously, we're going to get into a little more detail here. And this was just a quick overview of how to approach brewing with a French press. So we'll just move on to the next phase, which is waiting for the coffee to brew. Now, you need to understand that the last step of brewing is ultimately filtering the grounds out, right? How do you filter grounds out? It's like when you make chai at home, you basically sieve the tea leaves in a chunni. It's essentially the same principle, but not exactly the same in action, right? So a French press basically has a metal mesh filter. Like, for example, this one has two metal meshes, right? Or you could also have, and this is like a regular mesh filter, so it's not super fine. Now, if you like a very clean cup of coffee, you can try something like this, like the Espro press, which basically has some of the finest meshes possible. And it's a dual mesh, right? So this would really give you a clean cup of coffee. Because what happens is the finer your mesh, the lesser oils come into your cup and into your mouth ultimately. And it also obviously depends on how you have your coffee. If you like adding milk to your coffee, you would ultimately want maybe some amount of oils and some amount of heaviness in your cup. So the milk basically is not lost in the coffee. The coffee has some body. But if you have it black, you might prefer the clean cup that you would get out of an Espro. I also have milk boiling in a kettle on an induction below. The reason I have this is to show you another use for a French press in a little bit. If you don't have a fancy espresso machine to steam your milk, right? But essentially, this is our first cup of coffee. I'm sure it'll taste great. So you can either have it as is or you can add some milk. So now you just take your hot milk and add it, but there's no frothing done in this, right? What I'm going to show you is how you can actually froth your milk like a cappuccino with a French press towards the end of the session. Right. So this is closer to a filter coffee than a cappuccino, because this is how you would brew a filter coffee at home if you were just to move your milk around a little bit. So the brewing bit is pretty basic. There isn't too much to it. Ultimately, depending on how your coffee tastes, like my coffee is a little bitter, right? So what I would do to make it less bitter is I would not change my ratio, because I know that the ratio is pretty sorted. My water temperature is fine. I may agitate it less, or I might reduce the brewing time a little bit. So depending on how your coffee tastes, if it tastes a bit sour, right, once you're done brewing, you want to basically increase your brewing time or increase the agitation, keeping your ratio and grind size the same. Because changing your ratio or grind size would have much larger impacts to your coffee, and it might go from extremely sour to extremely bitter really fast. Uh, Now, something that a lot of people find a little difficult is cleaning your French press. It's actually not that difficult. Okay, so the first thing is, if you don't use your French press for anything except, if you use your French press for anything that is non-water, you have to be careful, right? So, for example, if I once I teach you the milk frothing technique, you need to use soap to clean that French press, like a Vim liquid and agitation. But if it's just this, right, it's not that difficult to clean. All you need to, Vivek, do you want to get the camera this side? I'll actually show. This is what I do at home when I'm cleaning my French press. I don't use soap. So this is the press. The grounds are here. I would just keep this here. Take water from the tap, right? Keep agitating, and as I'm agitating, take my chai wala chhanni and strain it out. You don't want to throw it. You don't want to throw it into the sink, because what happens is it'll clog it up. So essentially, it just took like a second, right? Now the next step is you just wait for this to drain out, and essentially this one last touch will take the grounds off of here, and you're done, right? But if you use soap, it becomes a little tricky, because what happens is you could have some soap left over. Now the final clean, what I do, and I do this before my next brew, I would take hot water before brewing. This does two things. One, before my next brew, it heats up my French press. Imagine this is the next day now. I'll fill it up half with water. Now it's also preheating, and what I usually do is I'll just take the French press down, and just vigorously shake it about 10 to 15 times. This does not spoil your French press, don't worry. Now look at this, right? Whatever grounds and oils there were are here. Just shake it and throw it. Essentially, your French press is clean. You don't need to use soap. And you use soap, there's a chance that you truly don't clean your French press properly, and you have like soap left in it, right? Which is not very tasty. So that is cleaning the French press. It's super easy. It's not very complicated. Now you know how to brew the French press, how to clean with it. I've spoken about a few variations on size, on portability. For example, the stainless steel one doesn't break, but the glass one could break. That's basically that. What I want to now cover is maybe something else that you can do with your French press, right? So let's just take this one per se. This is the one which you guys got with your kit. I'm going to show you how simple it is to froth milk. Like literally have like frothy milk with a French press. So you just take your hot milk from your right off the pan. I've done exactly that. You fill it up in a press. And you just agitate it, right? Now, you don't want to agitate it too vigorously, because you don't want to introduce too much air, but you don't want to go too slow as well. So just keeping the press submerged in the milk and agitation, right? So agitating. So we've done about 20 seconds, I think, of this now. And I'm just going to put this in the sink. And essentially what you have here is, I'm going to take a glass mug for you. So you can see, as I settle this down, can you look at the froth on top? It literally is like you froth your milk from a very expensive espresso machine, right? And it's like, this is as creamy as like milk could get. And it's in a glass container. So I'm going to leave it here so you actually see over time the froth and the milk separating, right? This is super creamy. And if you were to actually say, imagine this was just black coffee, and if I poured this on top, it would just look like a cappuccino that you would get in, or a latte you would get in a cafe. So this is a super simple way to froth milk. A lot of people don't actually try it because they think it'll spoil their press. It will definitely reduce the life of the French press, right? But it is a very low cost hack to actually froth milk as opposed to buying a very fancy machine. So for example, if you just want to, if you have a mocha pot at home, right, which gives you near espresso like decoction or a South Indian filter, and you don't want to make coffee with your French press, you can actually use your French press just to froth milk every day if you have your coffee with milk. And the decoction from a South Indian filter or a mocha pot would actually be a lot more syrupy and thick, right? So this is a mocha pot than a French press. So even better with milk. But a French press works better than a mocha pot if you just have your coffee black. Uh, so that was one very interesting aspect of the French press. You can obviously do other things with your French press, like I brew chamomile or other kinds of tea with my French press. It's super convenient. Just get loose leaf, and as you would brew coffee, you just brew your tea, right? Or you can also use your French press for. So actually, there are like lots of uses for your French press, but predominantly like the ones that are actually like have real world use cases are frothing milk, making tea, or tisanes, and obviously brewing coffee. So this was the bit about other uses of a French press. Okay, guys, so we'll move into the next bit.
What other coffees? There's one. What other coffees can I make in my French press?
What other coffees can you make with your French press?
Yeah.
So you can actually just brew black coffee with your French press, and ultimately what you need to do is you need to add milk, right? So you can use it to froth your milk or just have it as is. So you can only make black coffee with your French press. There's no other coffee you can make with it. Right. So let's get into coffee, right? So what kind of coffee actually tastes good in a French press? So it's an immersion method. If you use a light roast, ultimately you're going to get some amount of sourness that doesn't sit well with the coffee, because ultimately, remember, with the metal filtration method, you are going to have some amount of oils coming through in your press, right? So when you use a light roast, which is not supposed to have a lot of oils, which is supposed to be a cleaner cup of coffee, which is supposed to be fruity, acidic, sweet, um, not bitter, not sour, not heavy, sorry, not bitter, not heavy bodied, you ultimately do not want to use an immersion method, right? So if there's anything below a medium roast, try to avoid any immersion method, especially the French press. Uh, if you if you have a medium roast, it's a good idea to try it with the French press, but more often than not, it's going to end up being a little more on the sour side. So what you would need to do is maybe use a finer grind size or increase your dosage, basically get a stronger cup of coffee out. Darker roasts are a lot easier to extract, and they bring in a lot more body, a lot more oils, a lot more mouth feel into your cup. So ideally, a medium dark roast or anything above a medium dark roast works very well on a French press. So you go with a medium dark, so full city. Some people call it full city. Some people have the Vienna roast, the French roast. Um, each roaster has their own house blend. So usually a house blend works well because that's usually for espresso. So any blend created for espressos, mocha pots, South Indian filter work well on a French press. Any Robusta Arabica blend would also work well on a French press, because remember, Robusta has more body than Arabica, all else being equal. So ultimately, if you like your coffee with a bit of a punch, you like to add milk in your coffee, you're looking at a nice either 80-20, 60-40 blend, or 100% Arabica, medium dark, right? So those are the kinds of coffees you want to try. So if there's any particular roaster in the country you like, maybe I can tell you what blend would work with them, or you could ask them. You actually can reach out to your favorite roaster and ask him or her, hey, what coffee works well with the French press, and I'm sure they'd be happy to help you, or reach out to us. And you can find coffee on our website as well. So that is the kind of coffee you need to use for your French press.
What temperature actually should be used for the to brew coffee?
Right. So, great question. Water temperature is usually a brewing method agnostic. What I'm trying to say is that ideally, no matter what method of brewing coffee you use, you should not use boiling water. Coffee, unlike tea, burns very easily, right? So, what happens is the moment boiling water comes in contact with ground coffee, it becomes bitter. It loses all its aromatics, it loses all its complexity, and it just flat out tastes burnt and flat. So you would rather brew coffee at a lower temperature for a longer time than a higher temperature for a lower time for an average coffee. Remember, if your coffee is exceptional, right? If it's specialty 85 plus, you can actually brew at a higher temperature because the innate quality of the beans is so good that you are not scared about extracting certain flavors from the coffee. You know what I mean? Like basically a very high quality roasted coffee will ultimately, you wouldn't shy away from extracting more out of it. But if it's a commercial grade or entry level specialty coffee, you're going to have to be careful about your temperature. So again, if you want an absolute number, any number between 89 to 93 works. I prefer somewhere between 90 and 92 personally. I also prefer brewing for about 4 minutes. Now, if you don't have a kettle, you tell me what city you live in, I'll tell you how much time you keep it off of boil, right? Or depending on the weather. So I'll use Delhi as an example because it's extremes. In Delhi winters, you need to keep your water just like 20, 30 seconds off of boil. It's going to reduce. In Delhi summers, you keep it for a minute, minute and a half, and it's going to reduce to 92. So that's your reference point. So if you're in Bangalore, it's about 35 to 45 seconds off of boil. That is, once it reaches boil, you just keep your water on the side. So basically, once it's boiled, you just take your spoon, you put your grounds in the French press, and by the time that's done, and you're done looking at the coffee or water is ready. I hope I answered your question. The main basics or the main parameters for brewing with the French press, which I'm going to recap with you, right? Once you've decided on the size of your French press, let's assume it's 600 ml French press. We first look at ratio, right? Ratio is your water to coffee ratio, or coffee to water ratio, however you want to say it. With an immersion method, you use a stronger ratio, a higher ratio, more coffee to water. So your recipe would be anywhere from 1:10, that is 1 part coffee to 10 parts water, or 1:15. So what I did was a 1:12. I took 20 grams of coffee and 240 ml of water, right? That's 1:12. 20 grams of coffee and 240 ml of water. So that's your ratio, which you can play around with if you have a scale. If you don't have a scale, my suggestion is, if you're using a scooper or a spoon, set what your setting is, and then play around with other factors which we'll cover, right? Also, grind size is something you may not be able to play with if you don't have a grinder at home. So just buy your coffee for a French press. It's a medium coarse grind size or coarse, depending on where you buy it from. Don't be scared once you look at the coffee. If it's slightly more coarse than usual, increase your brewing time. If it's slightly less coarse, decrease your brewing time. You don't have to go to the roaster and say, hey, the coffee is too coarse or too fine. You can play around with your parameters. It'll take you 1 or 2 cups of bad coffee, but you'll learn a lot more out of it. So that's grind size. Brewing time, right? So what we covered. So my thumb rule is 4 minutes. Once you're done brewing at a certain ratio with a certain grind size, at 4 minutes, taste your coffee. If it's bitter, simple. Reduce your grind size, reduce your brewing time. And if it's not bitter, you basically have to increase your brewing time, right? So if it's sour, if it's not heavy enough, if you can't taste enough of the coffee, you increase your brewing time to maybe 5 minutes or 6 minutes. So that's the brewing time bit, right? Agitation is something we also covered. So when you start your brewing, you can agitate your water and coffee. Agitation increases your extraction, right? So if you've agitated your coffee and your coffee is bitter, don't agitate. And if you haven't agitated your coffee, and if you haven't agitated your coffee, then maybe try agitating to get more flavor out of it. So that was what we covered in the first 20 minutes. If I am
As a beginner, which coffees from the market should I experiment with on the French press?
Yeah, that's a great question. As a beginner, figure out if you like your coffee with milk or without milk, right? If you like your coffee with milk and you're just starting out, go for darker roasts. So just go for a dark roast and see how you like it, like a Vienna or a French roast or an espresso blend. If you have your coffee black, you can maybe experiment with a medium dark roast as well, which is not like super oily. So as a beginner, I think I would suggest that. And maybe, if you, for example, you buy a coffee and you brew with it, make note of your recipe. And if you don't like something about it, maybe write to us and I could tell you what you, maybe which other blend you could try or a change in your recipe. If you tell me how the coffee tastes, what you thought about it, I can maybe help you out.
So there's one from Paul. Supposing I brewed the French press above 4 minutes on the stainless steel and carried to office without removing the sediment, will my coffee become more strong?
The logic of this travel press, the fundamental principle is, and you would notice that when professional coffee cuppers taste coffee, is that when coffee is sitting on the surface of your brewer or on top of water, the extraction is a lot more. And once the coffee is in the bottom, inside in the bottom, the extraction is minimal. And there's a pretty popular YouTuber and one of the gods of coffee globally called James Hoffman, who's actually done a great video on this. So my suggestion is, uh, take a cup at home, take your French press coffee. Sorry, take 2 cups at home. put equal amounts of French press coffee in both the cups, pour water in them. After 4 minutes, right? After 4 minutes, take out the coffee on the surface of one cup, right? And after 8 minutes, take out the coffee on the surface of the other cup. Try both. What you would notice is the one where you took out the coffee off the surface after 4 minutes is not as over extracted as the one where you took the grounds off the surface of the second cup. What I'm trying to say is that with the stainless steel press, the moment you're done brewing at home, right? So imagine your grounds are in this. And this is, by the way, the world's lightest double-walled stainless steel press, right? So it'll also keep your temperature. So that's something you don't have to worry about. So once you're done putting your water and coffee, you would put this lid on top and you would press this down. So by doing this, you've automatically reduced your rate of extraction. Now, when you're traveling and whenever you drink your coffee, your extraction is only going to be very. So once you press the plunger down, your extraction is anyway very minimal, right? So you're not going to have a very over extracted cup of coffee. But the reality is that on day one, even if after you made your recipe and you find it a little bitter, you can actually reduce the amount of coffee that you put in your travel press. This is a pretty popular travel brewer used across the world. A lot of people actually, once they're done pressing it down, just put some milk in from top. So this is good for people who also like to add milk in their coffee. And usually for a travel brewer, that's a little difficult. But clean it after that because the milk will start smelling.
So we have a question from Kuntal. How to get a stronger cup of coffee from a French press? Should I increase the brewing time or increase the ratio?
Right. So you could do either, right? You could increase your brewing time, you could increase your ratio. So that's more coffee to the same amount of water. You could go finer on your grind size. So there's more surface area with your grounds. You could also, we covered increasing brewing time, right? Yeah, we covered increasing brewing time. You could also maybe try different roast levels so darker roasts extract more easily. Sky's the limit, right? Anything that basically increases your contact time or surface area, or use hotter water, right? So if you're using water at 91 or 92, maybe take it up to 94, see how that works for you. If you like your coffee bitter, maybe 94 works.
Can you share your favorite recipe of a cold brew on a French press?
Okay, so my friend Vivek wanted to speak about the use of a French press as a cold brewer. And I told him it's very much doable. But the reason why I don't propagate this because the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in the US, did some tests on making cold brew with a stainless steel mesh, right? What happened was that because coffee brewing at room temperature over a long period turns rancid, and especially when it's got a metal in contact with it, it turns rancid even faster. So some samples actually came out to be not the most safe for human consumption. I have expired food and expired snacks as well. Nothing happens to anybody. But I'm not saying you should do that. But the point is that it did not come out safe in some testing, right? So I usually tell people not to make cold brew with a French press. But if they really want to, what I suggest is one, brew in the fridge. Automatically, by brewing at a lower temperature, you are reducing the amount of pathogens that could form in your beverage. The other thing is using a French press to brew, instead of making your mesh come in contact enough, you just keep it like this, right? And there's no contact. As I was saying, so just ensure that your metal mesh is not in contact with your coffee and water liquid when you're brewing a cold brew with your French press. But yeah, it's not rocket science. Just don't use your French press at room temperature for 12 hours with your plunger immersed in the coffee. That may not be the best for you in the long run, I guess. I hope that answered your question.
So Kuntal asks, and you mentioned something about the French press life. When should we change the equipment?
Oh, the life of the French press. Yeah. When should you change it? That's a tough question. Yeah. So, I have a French press which is very old. It's a single mesh press. It's become so old that that sometimes the grounds escape from the sides, right? And it basically, there is no resistance. When I do this, it just falls in. So that's not a very useful French press. So there is no hard and fast rule about the life of your press. It depends on how you take care of your French press, right? It's like a car or your phone. But French presses easily last a few years. Like The one I'm talking about is like easily 3-4 years old, used regularly, and at my parents' place. And it's also not the highest quality. It's a pretty cheap press. So uh, they last pretty well. Plus, sometimes you can actually get replacement meshes these days. So this is something we're also working on. So if you feel like your meshes become old and you bought it from us, we'll definitely have meshes for you in the future. So we're working on that as well. It is delicate. Like, it's ultimately, most French presses are glass, right? So the body comes out, and you can actually wash this bit like really well once a month and store it alongside this. Don't keep it separately, because people tend to really hit their French presses on their slabs, etc. But just store it in a cool, dark place and dry it, and you're fine. It's not rocket science. Just like any other nice mug which you would keep at home. I keep it along with my coffee mugs.
If I break the beaker, can I get a replacement for the beaker, or do I have to buy the entire French press again?
Good question. So we don't do the beakers separately at this point. At some point, when our volumes do go up, we would plan to keep the beaker separately. If you break the beaker, unfortunately, you just have a skeleton. No, you can't get a replacement at this point, but that's something we're working on. Hopefully, in the next 6 months to 1 year. It's a longer term thing, because ultimately, most of the press is the beaker from a manufacturer's and shipping point of view. So for us to basically import an extra piece of glass is going to cost us the same amount freight wise, and the cost of goods is almost the same. So it won't make too much financial sense for you. So for example, if this is 1,000 rupees, the beaker would cost you about 600 to 800. So then you'd rather just buy a new French press. Unfortunately, that's how it is today. Okay, guys, if you don't have any more questions, I think we'll wrap up. I hope you guys had a fun session. Reach out to us on our Instagram handle if you have any questions. We'd be glad to, if you need my help, you can reach out to us there or DM me, and I'd be glad to answer your questions. You've attended the session. I'm glad you guys stayed till the end. Even if when you're brewing, you still have any questions, feel free, Vivek. Feel free to share my number with anybody on this session as well. And yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great weekend.